Hello and welcome to Insight, everyone. I'm Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. Thank you so much for joining us, and nice to have you back on set, Nnamdi.
Thank you so much, Lizzie. It's good to be back. This week, I will be discussing two key issues. First is the soaring price of air tickets in Nigeria. Nathaniel Abraham Inajo, aviation safety expert and former general manager, Safety Services Department of FAN, will be discussing the dilemma of price control in an unbundled aviation sector. And next, I will be engaging Barrister Onome Ibitimire, head of Chambers A&G Solomons, on the messy, often troubling uncoupling of married couples in Nigeria. I'm talking about divorce, but more importantly, about seeking peaceful ways of parting ways with a partner once a marriage fails.
Well, with the spate of insecurity in Nigeria and the Sahel, we will be talking about arms control and ways to tackle insecurity. And Abdul Masanawa, a security expert, will enlighten us.
Whatever the issues are,
the National Assembly is constitutionally empowered to scrutinize.
However complex or intricate.
We have involved all the academia, the members of the academia. We have involved the academies.
Be it government policies or in fact any issue of public concern.
Our job is to help you gain clarity and make sense of it all.
This is not really healthy for our democracy.
There's a lot of agreements in terms of who has been in power longest and who becomes the governor of the state.
It's also in the quality of food being consumed.
After all, perception is insight.
And gaining understanding is also getting.
Thank you so much for joining us. The holiday season is upon us, and I imagine many families are already planning a trip home for Christmas. However, I wonder how many holiday makers are planning to travel by air, especially now when a 1-hour domestic flight appears to cost more than the monthly salary of an average Nigerian worker. Tickets on sales for most of the popular routes have spiraled past 300,000 naira, turning the holidays, whether they are family visits or even business trips, into unaffordable luxuries. Why the airlines are pointing to the crushing cost of jet fuel, there's also the issue of multiple taxation and the volatile nature of the naira. The passengers are crying exploitation, especially on some of these key regional routes. Let me bring in my first guest for this conversation. He is Nathaniel Abraham Inaja, aviation safety expert. He was actually a former general manager, Safety Services Department of FAN. Currently, he is the CEO of Creative Aviation Solutions Limited, based in Lagos. Thank you so much for joining us on Insight. Good to have you on the program.
Good afternoon, and thank you for having me.
Let's begin with this whole issue of multiple taxation that the airline operators are alleging. And of course, there's also the move by the National Assembly just recently, if not last week, calling for a 50% rebate of some of the charges, allegedly paid by these airlines. I'm using the word allegedly here because we're also getting reports from the other side that, this is not true. But, I recently heard some comments by Obiora Okonkwo, who is the executive chairman of United Nigeria Airlines, to this whole issue where he said airlines pay about 18 different taxes on one single ticket alone. Matter of fact, most of the other airlines are claiming that they pay almost a total of 54 charges or taxes, as it were. I wonder if that is the case. But then what is your understanding of how much of a final ticket price is directly attributable to these multiple charges or levies imposed or supposedly imposed by government aviation agencies on the airlines? And which, in your opinion, which of these charges can be revised or suspended to provide or begin to provide immediate relief for travelers?
Okay, the truth is ticket prices have gone through the roof in recent times, and that's understandable. We travel, and we also experience these high cost of tickets. And there are quite a number of charges. The Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria has its own charges. The Nigerian Civil Aviation Agency has its own charges. And these are not organizations that get revenue from government. They have to generate, for instance, FAN doesn't get anything from federal government, neither does the NCA. And they have recurrent costs they have to recover. Sadly, the industry in this country is dollar denominated. A lot of the inputs into rendering air services in this country are denominated in foreign currency, and we all are part of this economy. We know what that means for the airlines, having to source for their funds with little or no concessions from the government. And all these eventually are transferred to the traveling public. So really, when you look at the multiplicity of charges, it's difficult to say which one should be reduced really. Because again, at the end of the day, we're looking at the safety issues that have to do with air travel. And if you're saying cut down on these charges, how do they meet up to attend to some other obligations they have? So let's see how the interaction with the federal government goes and what the federal government can do to make it much cheaper for people to travel by air.
Okay, granted. And I agree to a large extent that taxes and charges are important, especially if we're going to have a thriving, aviation sector. But to what extent is my concern here? Because as a passenger, I take a look at my ticket. What I see is just about 6 charges visible on my ticket. I then wonder, these other charges that the airlines are talking about, embedded, of course, in the fare that I am having to pay at the end of the day. If I see only 6 charges and the airlines are saying that they pay 54 charges, I wonder what some of these charges are, because, and I'll give you an example. I won't pretend like I did not do my research. I did my research. And I noticed that these airlines are talking about charges like the health charges for its personnel per cabin member, for instance. They're talking about charges like the space you occupy at the airport. Depending on the meter of your cubicle, you're charged. But these are charges that come annually. They come annually. So is it that the airlines now spread annual charges or embed annual charges into a single ticket for a single passenger, and that, and invariably I'm bearing the cost for whatever airlines are paying for their operations at the airport? Should that be the case?
Okay, yes, there are annual charges. There are also charges that go with each flight. The VAT, ticket sales charge, passenger service charge, and all that. So there are charges that go with every flight, parking and landing charges. All these go with every flight that is operated. So I think it's a sum of these charges we're looking at. Apart from the annual charges, like you put them, there are also charges that go with every flight operation that takes place. And these, again, have to be paid by the airlines.
Do you think there are some of these charges can perhaps be suspended, perhaps in the immediate or in the medium term, just so passengers can get somewhat of a relief, considering the etiquette crunch that we're experiencing at the moment?
That's a discussion that the airline operators would have to have with the government to see what can be suspended. But again, that will also depend on the extent to which government is willing to meet them halfway. Because you can transfer all the costs to the airlines and expect them. It's not a charity service they are rendering. They're in business. They have staff. True. They have overheads. They have to maintain their fleet. So, and quite a number of the training in this industry is recurrent. So you don't get trained and that is it. Many of the licenses expire after 1 year, 2 years, and you have to go back. And quite a number of these trainings are done overseas. So the government has to look at ways to support this industry too, and let there be a middle ground for discussions.
And that middle ground is what not to overflog this issue, but I'd like you to speak a bit more on that middle ground. The middle ground, what you mean when you say middle ground, because I know, for instance, that and not too long ago, as a matter of fact, the Minister of Aviation and Aerospace Development, that's Festus Keyamo, was quoted as saying that the federal government has no legal powers to regulate or fix airfares in the country. He did insist at the time, that was when he was speaking to journalists shortly after leaving the Federal Executive Council meeting not too long ago. He did say that the aviation sector, or reiterate, I should say, that the aviation sector has been fully deregulated for decades. Do you think that is enough to say, for instance, while, yes, granted the government cannot dictate prices in a free market, but it can address, or can it not address some of the underlying factors driving airfares? You did insinuate or made allusions to some of them. The volatility of dollar, for instance, that you mentioned.
Yes.
Is there possibly a single impactful policy, or should I say an amalgam of policies that the government can implement in the next couple of months to create, a lasting structural reduction in airfares for Nigerians?
Okay, let's look at it from this perspective. First, the economics of it, demand and supply come into play, especially towards the end of the year. We know a lot of people want to travel for holidays and all that. And airlines have a fixed number of aircraft they can deploy on these routes. So the principle of demand and supply come into play. There's no industry where you don't find prices appreciating when the demand is high. There's none in this country. So we cannot single aviation services and say, oh, bring down your prices when there are so many people. I was at the airport before I came to Abuja. You can't believe the crowd at the airports. The crowd at the airports was something else. And there are only X number of aircraft available. And if, as an operator, I'm going to deploy my aircraft, I want to make the most for it, or I'm out of it. Okay, so that's pure business. Then let's not also forget that air travel or air transport is only one mode of transportation within the general transportation network. So what government can do in the immediate, in my opinion, is that government needs to look into the other modes of transportation so that the pressure on air travel is reduced. Now, we're not talking about roads anymore. Roads are in very bad shape in terms of the infrastructure, then in terms of security. And then we're talking about inland waterways. We're not tapping that at all as a country. Very seldom do you find a person moving from one state to the other commercially via the waterways. And we do have a number of rivers that run through several states. We're not talking about that. Okay, what about the rail system? Look at the state of the tracks. Trains getting stuck in the middle of nowhere, derailing and being attacked by terrorists and all that. So air travel is only one option.
True.
And if the other options are not available, people will converge on this one option, and that's going to push up the costs. So if I need to travel to Ibadan, why should I fly to Ibadan from Lagos? I live in Lagos. It's a 1-hour drive. But try making that drive right now and get into some crazy traffic around the RCCG camp and all that stuff. It doesn't make sense, okay? So government needs to work on enhancing the efficiency of the other transport options that Nigerians should have. And that then the principles of competition come in. Airlines on their own, if passengers and travelers are choosing other options, they will do the needful and bring down their prices to attract passengers.
The law of demand and supply playing out there. And I get that totally.
Yeah.
I get that totally. But beyond the issue of taxes, that I think we've talked a lot about that, there's also the matter of the high cost of aviation fuel, which the operators also consider as a major pressure point. In fact, is it true that in Nigeria, airlines pay about 17% more for fuel charges, even with jet fuel constituting over 40% of the operating cost of these airlines, or an airline at least? My question to you,
I mean,
again,
yeah.
Please go ahead.
No, I was going to say that I don't have the specific figures for what airline operators pay in Nigeria. However, we also know the challenges we have with our oil industry, We have oil we're not refining. We have oil we're pushing out for people to refine for us and all that. Thank God for what Dangote is doing, and it's making a difference. But it will be a while before we see real impact in terms of the prices.
True.
So to that extent, the airline operators don't have much room to maneuver.
But then there's also the allegation of syndicates or, speculations ongoing within this sector or subsector as well. Isn't it possible for government to dismantle these syndicates and speculations that keep or continue to keep the price of jet fuel, aviation fuel, artificially and persistently high in Nigeria? What's the way to go about it? I mean, perhaps dismantle or monitor the activities ongoing in that subsector.
Allegedly, right? Like we say.
Allegedly. Allegedly is the word. These days, it is very important
Yes.
to use the word allegedly, or you end up somewhere else.
Yes. So, if there is a syndicate, they are faceless. We don't know them. We don't know how they operate. And if government knows them, then government has a responsibility to do something about that, because we cannot afford to have a cartel holding the industry by the jugular. That's not going to help anyone. So I don't know them. Like I said, I've heard it, but there's no single name, no face to this cartel. And so we can't say for sure that it exists.
You're an expert in this sector. I'm compelled to ask you a rather funny, but I think a lot of Nigerians will consider it a germane question. And, and I haven't monitored this area very well. I mean, that's why I'm asking you this. Do you think there's perhaps, some particular reasons why, certain regions like the Southeast consistently suffer from, fewer flights, yet higher fares, even during off-peak periods? I'm sure you've seen the deluge of complaints that, that are online now, comparing prices and travel hours with passengers from, some of these affected regions, pushing the narrative of being targeted. You talked about, and I'm saying this again because you talked about airlines taking advantage of the holiday season. And another thing we've noticed is that it will seem like the airlines overdo it, because now they're having an upsurge and now they are bringing in aircraft. Why can't we get the same level of commitment from the airlines during off-peak period? And why are we not seeing airlines maintaining the same amount of airfares that they take during off-peak period for during seasonal peak period?
Okay, well, I think that was something I talked about earlier when I talked about demand and supply. You want to make the most of your facilities and your infrastructure when you have a lot of demand at certain periods of the year, so that the lean months, what you have made can at least tide you over.
It doesn't matter
again,
it doesn't matter, and I'll give you a typical example. For instance, you travel to Lagos from Abuja, say a journey of 1 hour, 20 minutes, and you pay, say, 150, and then you travel to, say, Onitsha, and then that's a journey of, say, maybe 1 hour, 10 minutes, and then you pay 350. That's business, right?
Okay, I will not be able to
no, that's just an example.
Pricing.
I'm not saying these are the actual and accurate rates.
Yes, but again, to come back to your question, why do we not have flights going to certain regions? We have more. I know that NCA and a few players have tried to encourage airlines to spread across the country, but you find that most airlines come in, they're thinking about Abuja, Port Harcourt, Kano, and Lagos as their key points, the key routes they fly. And that, of course, must be informed by their business analysis and what they see about the market trends. So, incidentally, the biggest operator in the industry is from the Southeast. So if for whatever reason he, looking at the business of it, decides not to go there, maybe he needs to explain to us why. But like I said, he's a businessman. He must have done his figures, and if it's not very profitable for him, then it's not about ethnocentrism or anything like that. The man is a businessman.
True, true. There's a business of it. You know, in rounding off our conversation, I'd like to take you on yet another germane issue, an issue I consider quite germane as well. And some would say that some of what we're seeing play out, you know, some of these structural inefficiencies that we're seeing in the aviation sector is already beginning to have a spillover effect on passengers. And the increase in behavioral challenges that we see among travelers at the airport. You and I still recall what traveled with, I won't mention the airline, but passenger refusing to switch off their phone, another passenger stopping an aircraft from taking off, you know, and, you know, we've seen plenty of these, or rather we saw plenty of that play out in the not too distant past. You know, we know the rules. The rules are there for a reason. There are purposes for maintaining order, maintaining safety as well. But how quickly do you think we need to overhaul the entire framework of the aviation sector, and perhaps, you know, clearly evolve a model that reduces the price, or not only reduces the price of airfares, but also boosts efficiency in the sector? And this will be your final one.
Okay, thank you. Before now, I would say that public service information has been quite low. How to comport yourself around the airport and the expectations and all that. People only came in based on assumptions. But now I'm aware that the Federal Airports Authority and the NCA are pushing out a lot of videos, and they're doing a lot of public education to let people know, you know, why there are flight delays, how you should comport yourself, how your behavior impacts safety and security. And those two words are the most important words for us in aviation: safety and security. So everything we do is driven by safety and security. And the way passengers comport themselves determine how safe a flight could be. I mean, you can remember the incident that happened on board a flight. If that had happened when the flight when the aircraft was in flight, that could have been a disaster if you had fisticuffs and all that on board. So a lot of education is needed, and these two agencies are already pushing out. I recently saw a video that even talked about how to prepare for this season so that people don't get unnecessarily tense during this Christmas season, because the airports are crowded. So I'm aware, I saw that video from Federal Airports Authority of Nigeria telling people what to do so that they don't get caught in the Christmas rush. So we need to do more of these public enlightenment campaigns. And then, of course, the government needs to step in to help with certain things like maintenance. We need to have MROs in place that can help airlines so that they don't have to incur so much cost to go service their aircraft and bring them back and all that.
I'd like to thank you so much for coming on our program. Nathaniel Mark Abraham Inajo, an aviation safety expert from our General Manager, Safety Services Department of FAN, and currently CEO, Creative Aviation Solutions Limited, an agency organization based in Lagos. Thank you so much for coming on our program.
Thank you so much for having me.
We'll continue our conversation on insights, and not to douse the holiday vibe, that is if the whole conversation we've had earlier on airports or airline ticket crunch hasn't done that already for you. But my next topic is saddening, to say the least, yet serious enough not to be ignored even during the Yuletide. These days, we see marriages end in Nigeria as a public battle and disdainful spectacle. Most of such marriages that we're talking about, they end up as a costly, drawn-out conflict where peace is thrown to the wind. Money and resources are spent and drained, you know, and more often than not, they reach the well-being of everyone involved in the process, especially the children. But what if there was another path? What if parting ways at the end of a marriage could be a private, dignified process focused more on resolution rather than revenge? That's what my next conversation is all about. It's about peaceful separation at the end of a marriage and how couples can uncouple, doing so consciously protecting their children and even their assets through strategic agreement and honest conversation. Let me bring in my next guest, Onome Ebimitore, Esquire. She's the head of Chambers A&G Solomons. Welcome to Inside and thank you for joining us. I'm sure I murdered your name. Well, I'll get it right.
Thank you, Namdi.
Thank you for coming on the program.
You tried.
I think it's best to begin with this whole issue of privacy. I'm sure you listened to my intro into the conversation, and it will seem like legal proceedings, and I mean litigations and hearing on divorce cases, are private proceedings. What it means is that since the courtroom is the private arena, I can be privy to some of the spectacles that take place in court, during any divorce hearing. And you hear all sorts. I have seen couples washing their dirty linens in open courts, and even their lawyers guiding them. And these couples end up denigrating each other in open court, and whatever remains of the sanctity of their marriage. But Barrister, beyond the emotional toll, I wonder what the tangible long-term risks of having one's family most intimate details unveiled in public. The court documents are public proceedings and public documents after all. But what really is the alternative in terms of resolving divorce cases in open courts? Are there effective legal alternatives in the Nigerian legal system that keeps separation matters private and perhaps out of public view?
Thank you, Namdi. So, unfortunately, in Nigeria, our court proceedings are open. They are not private. It's the law that the court should be open to anybody. And that also includes divorce proceedings. Yes, like you rightly mentioned, dirty linens are washed in public, unfortunately, but that's what it is. When you go for divorce, anything can happen. There's no protecting your privacy anymore. The only time that the court can have a private hearing is when children are involved. Now, when I say when children are involved, it's not because, there are children in the marriage, so the entire proceedings go private, no. But when it now comes to the part where the children probably have to testify, maybe the judge wants to, have a one-on-one with the children, or see the reaction of the children to their parents when the issue of custody is up on the table, they may call for a private hearing. Other than that, there is no private hearing for divorce cases.
There are no options of peaceful resolution before? Yes.
So now the court gives room for a compulsory conference.
Okay.
That conference is for parties to see if there can be amicable ways to resolve the issues. Lawyers are also encouraged to advise their parties. Sometimes, they bring cases to me. Now, let me give you instances.
Please.
Okay? So sometimes clients come to me and they're like, lawyer, please, I want a divorce. I said, calm down. Oh, the woman is crying, or the man is so emotional. I'm like, calm down. Now, let's talk about it. How long have you been married? Do you have children? And so, oh, yes, we have children. We have 4 children. Okay, so what do you want to do about them? I'll take my children and go. Okay, what about their father? No, he won't see them and all that. So I try to talk to them. If the issues to me, if the issues are issues, then I said, why don't you look at it this way? Now, if you leave this marriage, do you want to get married again? Sometimes they say, yes, of course. How are you sure the next person is not going to be worse than your current spouse? So I try to talk to them to see how it can be resolved. Now, there are times that, it is really bad. Maybe there's physical assault and, there's threat to life. At that point, I won't be saying stay. I'll be looking more at, okay, let's see, maybe you should step out for your own safety. Thereafter, then we'll see if tempers have calmed down, and then you see how you can talk. But if there are issues that, maybe he's unfaithful, now, infidelity is a ground for divorce.
According to the Marriage Act?
Yes, according to the Marriage Act. It's a ground for divorce. But, the society that we are in right now, well.
And that's infidelity on any part, on any side?
On any side. It doesn't matter who is being unfaithful. If it's the man, the woman can take it up. If it's the woman, the man can take take it up.
Perhaps you could help us out here and talk about, because I know there are certain provisions in the Marriage Act that provides ground for divorce as well. I mean, which of them do you, of course they are all important, and you know, a spouse could pick on any of them, you know, as grounds for divorce. There's the issue of being separated from your spouse for maybe like 2 years, maybe like 3 years. There are other grounds, like you've talked about, infidelity. Which are the other key grounds, and which grounds are commonly found in your practice? I mean, most of the cases you've had to deal with, you know, as far as divorce proceedings are concerned in Nigeria.
Okay, so Section 15 of the Matrimonial Causes Act principally lays down the grounds for divorce. And under Section 15, you have several grounds. Now, one of the major grounds would be when the party has behaved in such a manner as would be unreasonably expected for the other party to remain. So that now you come to be talking about hostility, assault, violence in the home. So you can't expect somebody to be under such threats and remain. So that's one of the grounds. And of course, if the parties have lived apart for 3 years, a minimum of 3 years, and then if one party has abandoned the other for at least two years. So you have, these are several grounds that you can look at. But most times, they probably come under the behaving in such a way that is unreasonably expected for the other party to stay. So that's where you can say, oh, he's been a chronic cheat. Yeah. He doesn't take care of the family. He beats me up and stuff like that. He's a drunk, or he has gone out, he's so promiscuous, or she's so promiscuous that she has become HIV positive. You know, he has contacted some STDs. You know, these are things that the law can look at in determining whether this person has behaved in such a way that is not reasonably expected for the other party to remain in the marriage.
Barrister, again, we've gone back to the issue of law, but let me quickly talk about some of these grounds that you've mentioned as provided for in the Marriage Causes Act. You know, it's not as much as the grounds for divorce that I think a lot of people have issues with, because, for instance, I can fall in love with you today and fall out of love with you tomorrow. And I could choose that as a ground for separation or divorcing you, that, look, I'm no longer in love with Barrister Onome, and so I choose to go. Okay? So I think it's the nature that these proceedings assume at the end of the day, like I referenced earlier in the introduction and you have talked about, how I don't want to use a very strong language here, but they turn messy and really, really ugly. And, you know, there's also the issue of the impact of these proceedings on a child or, you know, children's sensibilities. You notice that in a bid to win, and I'm talking about either parties here, you know, whatever that is, a number of parents engaged, you know, in these proceedings, even using their children as pawns. In that process, they expose these children to conflict, whether intentionally or unintentionally. I was wondering, beyond the discretion of the court, like you talked about earlier, especially for the safety and welfare of the children, are there safeguards in law that provide for, you know, affected or impacted children in such a scenario in a way that, you know, they are shielded, guided, you know, from some of these ugly, you know, fallout of these proceedings, and that, you know, prioritize their psychological safety. Does the law guarantee or provide such guarantees, at least?
Yes. So here we're going to look at the provisions of the Child Rights Act. So Section 1 of the Child Rights Act is clear on the welfare of the children, that in any matter that has to do with the interest of a child, the paramount interest of the child should be taken first. So in reaching any decision that has to do with children, the court considers the welfare of that child or children, as the case may be. And the court ensures there's adequate provision for the children. So the issue of maintenance is prerequisite in divorce proceedings. How do you plan to take care of these children?
Okay.
So in taking care of the children, the court is going to be looking at what you're planning for education, welfare, medicals, and all that. So the child is protected because, I mean, these are innocent children.
True.
They didn't ask to be born into the union. And so the fact that they're already in the union and then the union heads for the rock for whatever reason does not mean they should suffer. So the law has provided for their protection under the Child Rights Act, which is an act that applies, in Nigeria, protecting the interest of the child.
But then, yes, the law does provide for them. There's also the issue of enforcement. Like, the court could direct the spouse. Let me take an example now and use myself as an example. The law could have dissolved my marriage to my wife and then mandates that I make provisions for them, for their education, for their well-being. But how does the court enforce these orders or, what are they called now, rulings or orders? Because we still see cases where, yes, the court lays it down on the spouse, in most cases, the male or the father, and then months later, they are still not adhering to what the court says. What then happens to them? Because is there any provision of law that says you have to do this, and when you don't do this, there are sanctions?
Of course, there are sanctions. There are sanctions, as with every decision of the court. If there are no sanctions, people will just get away with not, abiding by court orders. Even with matrimonial cases and cases that have to do with children. If the court has issued an order or a decree,
yes,
and a party defaults, you can present it to the court, and then the court is going to sanction the party, even up to sending the person to prison.
Great.
Yes.
Very quickly, because we're running out of time, the issue of prenups in Nigeria, a lot of people see it as, even though it's recognized in law, by the Matrimonial Causes Act, but they are not commonplace because we seem to think a lot with our heart, not our head, So it will seem like when you talk about prenups, it's almost seeming like you're saying, this marriage will not work, or you're planning for failure already. So it's seen as a sign of distrust even before the marriage begins. What would you describe as a fair and equitable, prenup within the Nigerian context? If we were to use prenup now as a tool for clarity and mutual respect between couples.
Okay, so I'm not aware of a prenup law, in quote, in Nigeria. However, I do understand the concept of prenup. So it is basically how to amicably share properties, assets, and whatever if the marriage fails. It depends on the parties.
But do you think, considering the rates of divorce that we're seeing in the country, do you think this should perhaps be reframed as a tool for, like I said, mutual respect? Because you now see some of these battles, long drawn-out battles, people struggling or couples struggling over property and division of assets. Can we now not reframe prenups as perhaps a tool to avoid such issues if and when marriages fail?
Yeah, so it can be looked into. I think with what is going on, it actually should be considered. Parties can, it's a prenup is an agreement, is a contract.
True.
And every contract is enforceable.
True.
Every legal contract, anyway, is enforceable. Now, if the prenup is such that the parties get to court and they decided, they're no longer in agreement with what is written, it can be enforceable in another proceedings. That is my opinion, that it can be enforceable in another proceedings. Now, if for the purpose of the particular divorce, parties can agree to share properties in a particular way, Now, for instance, if they have on their own entered a prenup, and then a divorce is on ground, they can decide to share the properties in the divorce because there's a provision for that. They can decide to say, this property goes to my wife, I own this property. They can just, inculcate it into, adopt it into the proceedings, and it becomes part of it.
Finally, before I let you go, and quickly too, I'd like to ask you a categorical question. Barrister, do you think peaceful divorce is possible, ever possible, in Nigeria or anywhere for that matter? I mean, considering what we're seeing play out. And how can that happen? I mean, does that happen with the couple themselves, perhaps, having an open channel of communication? Does that also factor in the quality of advice they get from their lawyers, who are, supposed to be the right professionals, who are supposed to advise them, on this whole process? How exactly can peaceful dissolution of a marriage be? Or, is that even possible?
Yeah, so already for there to be...
You're chuckling, but we see more messy cases than peaceful ones.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to say. The fact that there is a divorce already means that parties are not in agreement.
True.
So I don't know of anybody, unless maybe it's a fictitious marriage, that is going into a divorce happy, as in, like, genuinely happy. Oh, they may be happy that I'm getting away from this monster and all that, but in their hearts, this wasn't what they signed up for. I don't believe anybody goes into a real marriage with the plan to have a chaotic home. So when it comes to that, separation is never really pleasant. So the peace in it, like they talk about a graveyard peace.
Peace of a graveyard.
Exactly. However, the couples can get to a point where they are matured enough to realize that, okay, especially maybe they are children or something, and they're like, you know what, it didn't work between us. No bad blood. Let's take care of the children. So they talk, they have communications, mostly because of the children, and sometimes some of them have even reconciled. In the name of the children, yes, we've had cases where the divorce has been pronounced, and then in the name of welfare and maintenance of children, one person gets pregnant for the other, and then the marriage, So we see all sorts, in that. So, but for peaceful,
yes.
The lawyers, I believe lawyers have a lot to play. Yes, because parties come bruised. They're already bruised. They are wounded. And now they are in front of you.
It isn't in your place as a lawyer to exacerbate an already bad situation.
No, you shouldn't. You shouldn't say, no, don't take it from him. In short, we would do. No, you should be able to pacify the parties and then, okay, even if this thing has to go through, let's see how we can make it less messy. Because anything that goes out there is in the public domain. If you have children, they will grow up and begin to see the terrible things mommy said about daddy and daddy said about mommy. It's really not good for the children.
I think this is a good place to end our conversation. Barrister Onome Ebito-Mire, Head of Chambers, A&G. Thank you so much for coming in on our program. Hopefully, we bring you back here to talk on something a lot more pleasant, and good for the holidays. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you, Namdi. It's a pleasure.
Elizabeth Omori is up next. She will be talking about arms control and how to curb insecurity in Nigeria.
Tackling insecurity involves strategies and measures used by governments, communities and international organizations to address various forms of threats to safety and stability, often focusing on comprehensive multi-sectorial approaches. It also involves addressing the root causes of conflicts and employing diverse methods beyond military responses. On this segment, we will look at diverse ways insecurity can be tackled head-on. And my guest is Major General Abdul Masanawa, Director, Land System, DICON D7G. Sir, thank you so much for joining us on Insights.
Yeah, thank you, Elizabeth, for having me.
Thank you very much. Now let's begin with the state of insecurity. What's your position on this?
The state of insecurity in Nigeria is diverse today.
Okay.
Starting from the northeast, spreading down to northwest, north central, and now southwest. Of course, we have some insecurity earlier on in the south-south and southeast. So really, the military and other security agencies are fully occupied and overstretched.
Okay.
With security and military agencies fully involved and engaged in tackling insecurity all over. And this actually requires a holistic approach to tackling this insurgency in general.
Okay, so why is tackling insecurity difficult?
Tackling insecurity is so difficult because actually the military was virtually left alone to handle it.
Okay.
It's beyond that. It's beyond boots on the ground. That is military action.
Okay.
It requires a holistic approach or a holistic strategy using both kinetic and non-kinetic. I mean, using both military operation and other, what we call line of operation, social, economic, and even new the media need to be fully engaged in this tackling of this insecurity. And I will discuss that in detail later.
Well, let's extend it to the Sahel. If you take a look at what is happening in Burkina Faso, in Mali, in Sudan, these areas are faced with, many of them, insurgency, terrorism. How do we strengthen surveillance in the Sahel and Nigeria? So I needed to begin with Nigeria. How do we strengthen surveillance, security surveillance?
Well, first and foremost, there need to be cooperation with all these our Sahel neighbors. What I mean by cooperation, that is both militarily and economically.
Okay.
Because when you look back, the problem of the whole Sahel actually started with the fall of Gaddafi. Gaddafi uses nationals of other countries as his own military. Now, the fall of Gaddafi, some of these arms, ammunition, and other equipments were carted away by these insurgents who came from various parts of the Sahel countries. Now, with no resources for them to live, they result into a lot of insurgency. And then, secondly, with the advent of ISIS activities, Boko Haram, and other insurgents, the whole thing escalated. And of course, when you look at the other economic aspect, there are issues of mineral resources and what have you that each of these insurgents want to control for them to continue to acquire arms and ammunition and continue to carry out their own activities. Now, what do we need to do? Cooperation. Secondly, to cooperate, it means for us to come together and agree on the best way, the best strategy to tackle it. And all these countries need, that's the military aspect, they need equipments. They need surveillance equipments, advanced technological surveillance equipment, drones, UAVs, air assets in general. That's what is required for them to be able to identify where these insurgents are, for them to be able to strike them before they even attack. I'm talking of the military should be able to identify the locations and strike them before they attack any community or any town.
So we need to strengthen our surveillance. Now, criminal elements come up with several tactics and strategies, but really from the point of the military, are strategies not effective enough in frustrating their efforts? And if we are to consider kinetic approach, is it failing? Is it not working? Or could we consider non-kinetic approach?
A holistic strategy for fighting or tackling insurgency in general requires both kinetic and non-kinetic. Now, I will break them into segments.
Okay.
But before that, let me give a small history of Nigerian civil war of 1967 to 1970. When the war broke out between Nigeria and Biafra, what did the government do? Today, the president has declared national emergency on security. The next thing to do is the Security Council to sit down and coordinate and see how to tackle this insecurity in the country. And in the civil war period, there was mass mobilization, commandeering, mass recruitment of armed forces and other security agencies. Trucks of foods were moved from the north to the south, including even tobacco. Drinks and beverages were supplied to troops. Cows, everything was all gears. What I'm saying is that the whole national infrastructure and resources must be mobilized to support the fight against insurgency. That is the reality.
Okay.
Now, when you're talking of the non-kinetic aspect, that involves all the government at all levels, from local government to state to the federal. And I will break them into social and economic. Social, in the sense that schools, hospitals, other infrastructures like roads must be readily or provided or improved for the communities. Border towns need to have government presence because these insurgents, most of them come from...
Most borders are porous.
Borders are porous. I will come back to that, border security, which is actually the immigration aspect. And they too, they require not only physical, but advanced technological monitoring devices and surveillance devices. For our immigration to be able to see the people encroaching or moving into our countries, they need early warning. And that could be achieved through sensors, drones, UAVs, and of course having standby vehicle to move to where there is infringed. Because if they stay in one checkpoint, the people coming in, they already know where they are deployed, and they will always follow other illegal routes and bypass them. Now, still on the same social economic aspect of it, is vast, but it is all should be done by local government, state, and the federal government by providing all those infrastructures, because a situation whereby today some governors are closing schools. We have civil defense corps. They have a responsibility of providing security and police to those schools. You don't shut down schools because of insecurity. You provide security and secure the populace, or the pupils rather, to be able to attend to their education. And there should be deliberate effort also to make sure that school is compulsory, particularly in the northern part of Nigeria, where you have much of Almajiri and so on, because there are easy, ready-made recruits to be recruited by the insurgents. Now, the economic aspect, actually, we have to revive we have to provide infrastructure for our industries and factories to be functional, so that our teeming youth that graduate will be gainfully employed in all those industries and factories. With that, there is no question of an idle mind is a devil workshop, because once you are gainfully employed, you cannot be lured by one cleric or one bandit that come, let's go and do this, because you have things to do when you wake up in the morning.
Of course.
Is that the job of the military to be providing security to school for goodness sake? And they are supposed to be out there conducting operation. That is the kinetic operation. Those jobs should be left to police and civil defense, and including even fire service. Now, they are understaffed. There should be mass mobilization, mass recruitment, because this is now emergency situation we are. So there should be massive recruitment and training of people that should be employed to save our infrastructures, including schools and other national strategic infrastructures. And not only that, the military can now concentrate on their own primary responsibility. And once they clear a town or an insurgents area or whatever, the police will be moved down there to take over and restore law and order.
From your explanation, what are the challenges, and in what areas would you like the federal government to come in?
The challenges Defense Industry Corporation actually that is facing, because it has the capacity, it has the machinery to produce a lot of arms and ammunition and equipment.
Okay.
But the DACON itself requires funding.
Okay.
And that is the reason why the president last year approved the DACON Act, which actually encouraged military industrial complex. The Nigerian Armed Forces and security agencies can have access to equipment or defense equipment requirement that they need without actually going outside Nigeria to look for those equipment. So the military industrial complex is actually the solution to that problem of funding.
Okay.
Because private sectors now can come in and collaborate with DACON to produce the defense needs of Nigerian Army and other security agencies.
Major General Abdul Masanawa, Director, Land System, DICON D7G. I want to thank you so much for joining us on Insight, and thank you for giving your thoughts on the issue before us. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, too.
Thank you.
And that's it on this week's episode of Insight. Do join us same time next week for more on the program. My name is Nnamdi Odipo.
And I'm Elizabeth Omori. When you see something, say something. We'll see you next week. Bye for now.